Hello, everyone, and welcome to 5 Questions, 5 Artists with the amazing Bisa Butler. This program is part of Los Angeles County Museum of Art's exhibition, Black American Portraits, a show that I co-curated with Christine Y. Kim that covers 200 years, over 200 years of Black American portraiture. My name is Liz Andrews. I am the director of the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art, and I have the pleasure to introduce you to Bisa Butler. Bisa Butler was born in Orange, New Jersey, to a college president and French teacher. Butler earned her BFA from Howard University, HBCUs, and a MAT from Montclair State University. She was a high school teacher for 13 years. In February 2021, Butler was awarded a United States Artist Fellowship. She recently had a solo exhibition at the Art Institute of Chicago, which began at the Katona Museum of Art. Her work has been acquired by institutions including the Smithsonian, National Museum of African American History and Culture, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, LACMA, the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. So welcome to the virtual stage, Bisa Butler.
Hi, Liz.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Absolutely. And we have such a treat today in getting to speak about your work in general, but also about one work in particular, the quilt from 2020 that you made in honor of Chadwick Boseman, that is a part of Black American Portraits.
Yes, I'm so proud of that particular piece. And I was so thrilled for it to be a part of the historic exhibition, Black American Portraits, what that says about the standing of Black art in this country, considering the other famous Black exhibit in Los Angeles, I think, was it in the 70s?
Oh, yes. So right. The show was partially inspired by 2 centuries of Black American art, which also started at LACMA and Travel the Country.
Right. I felt watching the documentary, Black Art in the Absence of Light, when they spoke about that exhibit, it was like a jumping off point to say that this is the aesthetic and that the aesthetic is very wide and it's varied and that these artists belong in this conversation. So for me to be included in the exhibit, it was not only was this portrait of Chadwick Boseman going to be belonging to the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and he being an actor who lived in Los Angeles, but it was also a sense of belonging for me, myself, that I'm a part now of this legacy of African-American artists and artists who focus on African-American subjects.
Yes. And I'll share with you that when we were planning the show, I distinctly remember being like, oh, it'd be so great to have a Bisa Butler in this show. But, we already have so much and, we're doing so much. And literally the next week, our beautiful friends, Dorita and Robbie Robinson, dropped out of the sky like angels and made this possible. So I'm so thankful to them and thankful to you for your work and thankful for your time because we love you in the studio making pieces. So I'm appreciative of you taking a moment to speak with us.
Absolutely.
So I'll start with the first question.
Sure.
And we can maybe pull up the slides. First, we ask all artists the same questions. I want you to talk about your choice of medium and materials and symbols in this work, and if there were any surprises that arose considering the medium, materials, and symbols.
Well, I want to talk about this work because the colors that you're seeing in here are very important. You see the difference between the portrait of Chadwick Boseman, the quilt, versus the photograph. Yeah. My father's from Ghana, West Africa. My mother's from New Orleans, Louisiana. Well, she was born there, and my relatives have been born in Louisiana since the 1700s on my mother's side. And the loss of Chadwick Boseman, what that meant to me as a person, as an artist, and then as an American, as a human being, when you lose somebody who meant so much to so many people in so many different realms. You know, he was Chadwick Boseman, the actor, the thespian, the activist, the husband, you know, the son. I recently saw a small video. One of my friends who lives out in LA brought her son to see the exhibit. And I think he is about 7 or 8. And she asked him, "Who's that?" And he looks and he goes, "T'Challa." So to him, Chadwick Boseman is T'Challa. He's the Black Panther forever. And so that was part of the reason why I called the piece Forever. You know, that was his T'Challa's catchphrase, you know, Wakanda forever. And when Chadwick spoke at Howard University's commencement, and I think it was 2018, he said Howard forever. And so I really felt like that title suited the piece. And then going back to what you asked about materials, I'm a quilter. And for me, fabric is the way that I can express myself more easily. I can express the reverence that I have for someone in a way that I wasn't able to do when I was painting in undergrad. There's something about the resonance of fabric that gives us memory that paint may not necessarily do. For me, being a person of an African-American descent on one end and directly from Ghana on the other end, using African cloth makes me think of my ancestors. It makes me think of my living aunties and uncles, and lets other people know we've seen that fabric. Most of us are familiar with what Dutch wax looks like. So it lets us know that I'm saying this man has a connection to Africa, whether it be by his blood or by the role that he played in the Black Panther. And the red and black robes I chose specifically because red and black in Ghana are colors that you wear at a funeral. Red is worn to express pain, and black is worn to express sorrow. So when you lose somebody who is young or the death hurt, I mean, a loss hurts, but when you lose somebody who was older than 70 years of age, then they tend to wear all white because the family and the crowds are expressing that this is still a solemn occasion, but this person lived a long, full, and good life, and that we can celebrate their homegoing. I put the red and black on Chadwick because we can still celebrate if you have a belief that, you know, after death, you go to a better place. But the way we felt being left behind and not being able to see what else he would have done, I wanted to really dress him in those red and black robes as my commentary about how I felt about his loss.
Right. And what a powerful tribute to him. You know, I look at the photograph and your work side by side, and the red is so regal. You know, it really does something beautiful, and it's impossible to see looking at a 2D image of it. But when you see the work in the galleries, one of the things that struck me when we put it on the wall was it looks as though the folds in the robe are three-dimensional. It seems like it's actually flowing out there, even though it's pretty much just flat. It's that just speaks to your beautiful craft that you've developed around this. And I love the various ways the African Dutch wax prints symbolize a connection to Africa, both in the imaginary but also in reality through blood.
Yes. And I wanted to say one last thing about the materials of the piece. I used black velvet for Chadwick's hair because he wore his hair in like a natural twist style. And I use velvet a lot when I'm trying to portray African-American hair, especially if it's like 4C, kinky hair texture, because again, the fabric is giving us something. It's telling the viewer what this feels like, that soft velvety texture. It's saying something about luxury. It's saying also something about care. When do you see velvet? You know, when do you wear velvet? It's not really everyday fabric. So I want to say that I feel like natural hair is beautiful, however it is. And I'm also saying that I feel that his hair is valuable. This person deserves beautiful things. And on the other side, I used a green lace with, it was like a green, electric green lace. And that again, it was me. I want to use lace on one hand to have the viewers think about, when do you see lace? When is it used? It's the same, special occasions. It's a delicate thing because a lot of times you think of kinky hair, you think, oh, that hair is rough. It must be really strong, like Brillo, not realizing that sometimes African-American hair can be some of the most delicate hair and you have to handle it with care. And the electric green I chose because I like the color of it, obviously, but I also like that it can show the twists and the kinks. The velvet may not translate here on the screen, but you can see those twists and bends with the green. So yeah, you can see it better in this image. You can see that green lace. That was, I think they were green flowers, but I cut them up. And then I used the silk velvet for his hair as well. That's another thing that I tried to do as I've been working in fabrics, is using the best fabrics that I can. Sometimes the fabric might be $150 a yard. And I'll be like, well, let me just get a quarter. I may not get the whole piece, but like I have to have some of that fabric. My mother and my grandmother were dressmakers. They weren't quilt makers. So the fabrics and the remnants that they left behind for me when they passed were remnants of dress fabric. If you go in a fabric shop and you ask for quilt fabric, they're going to direct you to the cottons and the calicos. And there's a certain palette. It's usually mostly pastel.
Yes.
Within the last 10 years, there's been more African-American quilters who are beginning to affect the industry. And so they've been including batik cloths from India and other cottons from other places where the colors are more intense. And they haven't quite gotten over to using African Dutch wax yet, or African textiles, but the African-American quilters and white quilters or quilters of other races who are attracted to that fabric are seeking it out and using it in their quilts, regardless if that's quilt fabric.
Oh, I love that. And I love the reverence of the rendering of using these beautiful, fine fabrics. And I want to just say to the audience, as we're speaking, feel free to use the Q&A function, and we'll try to take as many of your questions as you like throughout the talk. But someone has already asked one, and that was, what does the green rainbow and lush green background signify?
Just as an aesthetic choice, red and green are complementary colors. So I know that they will vibrate against each other. Back in the day, when I grew up like in the 70s and 80s, but you wanted your fabrics to match. So you wouldn't necessarily put red and green together. You're like, that's tacky. Those don't match. But I like the colors that clash or complement each other, because I think when we used to say it was too loud, but that's like a vibrancy that happens when colors are opposites, they clash. And I want Chadwick to stand out from that background. And I chose that because I knew that Chad was, he was a man of faith and he was a Christian. And so that belief that your soul will reside in heaven or in paradise forever. So I wanted him to be, that was sort of a message to myself to don't be so sad because he's in a better place. So let me illustrate this beautiful, lush place that he's in. And then again, a reminder of the movie that really, what do I want to say about Black Panther? It defined him for a lot of people, like my friend's little son. Like for children, he will forever always be T'Challa living in Wakanda. So that background too was a nod to that pivotal role of Wakanda. And the rainbow, I look at it as like a sign of peace and beauty and tranquility. So that's what I would wish that he has and that all of us will have when we go to the hereafter. And then if you could go forward a little, I had skipped over the blue version. There was an earlier iteration that I did of Chadwick where I was using blue fabrics, that one. So when I finished his figure, I had always had in my mind, I had this blue fabric already. And I was like, I want to use blue because I want to express that more of the American sentiment. We have the blues, you know, we use that a lot. I feel sad, I feel somber. And when I laid him down on it, it changed so much of what I wanted to say. It almost looked like that. Now you see the clouds above the rainbow even more, as if it was a rainy day. The fabric had a lot more gray in it than I originally expected. And it just didn't work at all. That wasn't what I wanted to say about him. I never want people to walk away from my work feeling badly, but it's also for me. I don't want to feel that somebody is in a perpetual suffering. And I don't want to suffer perpetually either. But I don't want to be reminded that I need to feel sad when somebody is gone. I want to celebrate the good things that they did. And so I included this in the slideshow just to show like the difference between that expression between the green background and the blue and gray.
So I'm curious because they're so similar with the rainbow and the palm trees. Did you use a completely different fabric or how did that work?
Yeah, a lot of times the Dutch wax fabrics, they put them in different colorways. So I think this fabric, they must have had about 5 different colorways. And then I bought a few of them to experiment with.
Gotcha. Okay,
but
so you already had the green.
I had the green. No, I had to order it. That's why I had to order the green.
Okay.
I had the blue because I just knew that this was going to be perfect. But like, you know, the best laid plans, when you lay it down there, the background of my fabric becomes like this, the setting for the play. And that means everything. It can change the entire conversation about what I'm trying to say about him. And so I usually audition. Sometimes I can audition 50 different backgrounds before I find the one that I want. But in this particular quilt, I had a real clarity of vision of what I wanted to do, what I wanted to say about Chadwick Boseman, because he was a former classmate of mine at Howard. He was a freshman while I was a senior.
Wow.
I didn't know him or interact with him, but we came from the same background as far as our school philosophy. The School of Fine Arts at Howard had a specific manifesto that they charged us with. And it didn't start there. It started earlier during the Harlem Renaissance, or earlier than that with the negritude movement, and earlier than that with the abolitionists. It was about Black liberation, having a Black what do I want to say? Elevating our race and being able to pull each other up when you have more. Back to Du Bois and the Talented Tenth. Like we weren't in it alone. We were charged with, now you've been given this education, you've been given this privilege of being able to sit at the feet and learn from these great artists, but yet and still most of our people, the majority of our people in this country may not have that privilege. And so you have to do what you can to help your race. So I knew that Chadwick and we had that similar vein, that it's not just art for art's sake, it's art for the people. Yeah.
I love that. Well, two things I want to say. One is, you said you audition backgrounds for the portraits, and I love that because there is a vibration from the work, and it's performative. It is it gives it really impacts the viewer on a beautiful level. So I love this idea of audition for the performance of the piece.
Yes.
And the other thing is, speaking about Howard University and the art program, I just wanted to share with you, you may have seen, but when you walk into the Black American Portraits exhibition, right on next to the title wall, there's a portrait of a sailor from around, from around 1800, but right next to that, there's a self-portrait of James Porter.
I saw that.
Yeah, and of course
I loved it.
It's so good. It's such a beautiful piece.
Yes.
And, and James Porter, of course, founded the Department of Art there at Howard, and is considered one of, if not the first, art historian looking at art of the African diaspora.
Yes. So. I was lucky enough, a woman contacted me on Facebook, and she had fabric that James Porter and his wife collected or bought in Africa when they were traveling. I think, who knows, I'm not sure when, in the 50s or 60s.
Wow.
And so she just sent it to me. She just sent me fabric. So I didn't use it all, but I used some of it in my pieces, because I feel like that, again, that's that legacy being passed on.
Wow. How beautiful.
Yeah.
That's so nice.
Yeah.
There was a question from our audience. What were the types of birds in the piece intentional or inspired by anything, or was that part of the fabric?
I'm not sure if I saw birds in this particular one.
Oh, in the
but maybe in the
Yeah.
Hellfighters. We can, if we can go to one of the other images. I wanted just an example of the hours of stitching that goes into my work. It took me about 6 weeks to finish the Chadwick Boseman portrait. And that whole thing might have been 5 weeks of putting the piece together, and then 1 week of sewing. The sewing is intense, but it's a lot faster.
Wow. So 5 weeks of arranging.
Yeah.
1 week of sewing.
Yeah. Decision making, trying this, trying that.
Wow.
Well, these two are fine. I'm working on a portrait of the Harlem Hellfighters. They were a World War I regiment from New York, Newark, and Philadelphia, mostly Black and Puerto Ricans. And the birds in this, I use bird fabric a lot, because I feel like for us as Black people, it's dual meanings. We're Americans, so the birds are symbols of freedom. But as African Americans in particular, that freedom is something that we're still striving for. Justice, truth, justice, freedom, and the bird flying free reminds me that this is something, it's an ideal that we hold sacred and important. and that our ancestors sacrificed a lot for, and we're still sacrificing. So the Harlem Hellfighters, this World War I unit, they signed up themselves. They weren't drafted. And this is when the country was deeply segregated. This is like the beginning of World War I, 1917, 1918. They wanted to be a part of this effort to preserve democracy, despite not being able to vote freely in this country, despite not being able to go to integrated schools or sit at the front of the bus or walk down the street without being stopped and harassed. They felt if they went over to Europe and fought bravely, that the country would see them as men, not as boys. A lot of them were just in the sharecropping era. So a lot of their relatives probably lived the same as they did during slavery. Being that they were from Harlem or from Newark or Philadelphia, they lived in the urban ghetto type setting where you're still economically segregated, if not by law. I'm not exactly certain of the laws at that time, but these areas are still economically segregated in New York. Or in any urban city, it's still going to look similar to how it looked then without the gentrification. And they went over, and the white American soldiers refused to fight alongside the Black soldiers because they felt that the Blacks didn't have the intellectual ability to make the right decisions in battle. They thought of us as less than. You can lay railroad tracks, you can build trenches or dig trenches, you can supply munitions, but not necessarily fight in combat. So these guys really wanted to fight. They signed up to fight, not to become laborers in Paris. And the French said they would take them. They wanted soldiers and they needed boots on the ground. The French trained them. They gave them French weapons, French helmets. And they fought so valiantly that the Germans, when they saw these Black men, just like, imagine you're 19 and you want this battle. So they fought so vigorously that the Germans called them the Harlem Kampfer, and that meant the Hellfighters, because they fought like they were coming out of hell. Which in a sense, right, they were bringing hell, giving them hell, and they were fighting for more than just democracy, but for themselves to be seen as equals. They suffered the most casualties out of any unit, American unit in World War I. They stayed on the front 191 days, which was the longest out of any other unit. They refused to be taken alive. So that's why they had a lot of casualties. And the French awarded them the Croix de Guerre in 1919. So they have their medals on in this photo. They're posed up on the ship. They're getting ready to march down Fifth Avenue to white and Black audiences. So these are the heroes coming back. They haven't seen their mothers yet, and they're babies. They're very young. They haven't seen their sweethearts and their girlfriends yet. Somebody snapped a picture, and I just love that you can feel the energy of the guys right there. They're ready, and they all have their medals on their chest, the Croix de Guerre, which the French awarded them for valiant fighting, I think. Yeah, for fighting, basically active duty fighting. But they were not. This is before the Red Summer. This is before Tulsa. This is before Black towns were razed and burned to the ground. Not all of them, because there were plenty that came before. But I meant to say that they did not. I think I read in Tulsa some of the beginnings of those skirmishes, the Black men wore their World War I uniforms because they thought they might be respected if they came dressed. But they were not. They absolutely were not. And these soldiers did not get recognized by the American government until this past September.
Oh, wow.
So 1919 to 2021. That's
Over
how
100
long.
years.
And so I made a portrait of each of these 9 men.
Mm,
And this piece recently was acquired by the Smithsonian, and it's hasn't been unveiled yet. But I feel like when I come across photos like this, I've been tasked with, now that mantle has been passed again. Like, am I just gonna skip past it?
mhm,
Or am I gonna take the opportunity to tell the story of these men?
mm,
They may not have been honored by the United States government for 100 years, but they're going to be honored by me, and
mm,
they're going to be honored by the people who see them, and by the museums where the piece hangs in it, and everyone who can see it and learn their story.
mm. And what a powerful thing that this will hang on the National Mall,
Right.
on the symbolic center of power of this
Yes.
country.
And if you go to the next slide, you can just see some of the guys up close. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
included this to show you that some of the photos, that photo with them all together looks clear. But when you
Mhm,
zoom in, it's
mhm,
not a high resolution photo. So I have
mhm,
to do a lot of studying, squinting,
mhm,
and then thinking about the faces that I know and
mhm,
seeing what I can from the photo and doing my best to try to portray the person as I think that they looked. But
mhm.
it's all of the information is not there.
You're really bringing details that you have to kind of resurrect out of these photos.
Right, right. And if you go to the next one, you can see a few more of the guys. Oh,
Mm,
I loved with that card, it had the names of the soldiers and their nicknames. So
mm,
the young man on the left, they put his nickname was Eagle Eye, Ed
mm,
Williams. So Private Ed Williams, and then they put in quotes Eagle Eye. And I love that it's giving us a window into what they called each other. These guys fought together and lived to tell the tale.
mm,
And they still had humor at the same time, because on the left, Eagle Eye, one of his eyes, he kind of has a lazy eye. And so
mm.
I thought, isn't that how we always do? We poke fun. And then it's like, I acknowledge that you have this lazy eye, but it's all good. We're going to tease you about it. As a matter of
Yep.
fact, that's your nickname now.
And it's all love.
Yes, yes.
The second question we have lined up, and this can be about any of the images that you're talking about, but or maybe in general,
Mm-hmm.
what is your relationship to the sitter or sitters, and and how does that kind of influence the way you consider representing them?
As I stare at these photos, it took me 11 months to finish the Hellfighters piece.
Wow.
It was 13 feet, is 13 feet by 10 feet, and the guys are slightly larger than life size.
Wow.
So it took, for instance, like Eagle Eye, it took me about a month to finish.
Mm,
And by studying his image, I'm trying to figure out, what is he like and what can I add to this to tell people what I think. I found out that one of my dearest friends, who I've known since I was 8, her grandfather was a hellfighter.
oh, wow.
Her great grandfather, I'm sorry.
Mhm,
But he was living when we were little kids. I remember her great grandfather, but we had no idea what he had been through, and what he had done for this country. And
mm,
she said he never talked about the war.
mm.
And like a lot of people who've been through traumatic
Yeah.
incidences, you're not going to speak about it. And especially if the reception when you get back is less than favorable. Um, so my relationship, I almost feel like they're all my grandfather. In
Mm,
one sense, they're older, but in another sense, I'm looking at them as young. And I'm a former high school teacher. So
mhm,
looking at their young faces, it's reminding me of my students. And so I feel that almost like we're kin. That's the relationship. And I feel an incredible sense of responsibility as well. Like, I have to get this right.
Mm,
I must
mhm,
get this right. If you
mm,
look on one side of Eagle Eye's body, it's kind of a blue fabric with, it looks like triangles, but
mhm.
those are envelopes. That's a Dutch wax fabric called love letters. And so
Mhm.
I thought about how many of these guys have a letter in their pocket from their mom or their
Wow.
mother, their aunts, their sisters, their brothers, their
Mm,
father, um, and keeping it close to the chest, because that's the talisman that has helped them be able to come through this. And so I
mm,
want to say things about these young men that I know to be true based on our community, that we love our sons and we care about our sons and we care about their lives and we're proud of them. So all of those things
mm,
I'm trying to communicate. This is the way I feel about young Black men, and it's the way I feel about these men in particular.
mm.
Um, on the young man on the right, he has a strip of kente going across. In the original, that's a bag strap. But in
Oh,
mine, I wanted to keep it like um, it was something that he had been adorned with.
mm,
And I want to adorn him with what he deserves, which is honor. And in Ghana, kente cloth is something that's used for royalty, very wealthy people, special occasions. And so I want him to have that legacy to carry with him. You're not just a young guy from Harlem. And you're not a guy who's not just a young guy whose relatives travel from the south to the north. And you're not just someone whose ancestors were enslaved and captured. You have a legacy that goes
mhm,
back thousands
mm,
and thousands of years. It's yours. You deserve it. I want you to own it and wear it and rock it. And so I want them to
mm,
look beautiful, and I want them to have like this mantle of honor with them at the same time.
mm. And it's interesting you talk about that kind of sash and the kente because we had someone who's from Ghana in the audience say, being from there, kente is the most regal fabric.
Yes.
And they were wondering if you would integrate in the future, but you know what you already have. So we'll probably see more of it.
Yeah, you will pick it up in my work a lot. Kente is very expensive. Also, I want to say it's hand woven, mostly by
Mhm,
men.
mm,
Um, and my relatives are always back and forth to Ghana, and they're always asking to bring me more kente. You can buy kente easily here in the States, but maybe not all the different varieties of kente.
mm, mhm.
So I try to throw it in there, but I wouldn't necessarily do a whole background of kente because it's so precious to me, and I just don't have enough of it for that.
You've maybe covered this, but one of the questions that we have asked every artist is what you think is the responsibility of the artist in representing significant figures or historic
Mhm,
figures.
mhm. Well, I think that this country, we're so split. It's like we're almost living in two different worlds.
Mm,
Historic figures who I grew up hearing about. I went to an Afrocentric um, day school in Newark, New Jersey called the Chad School. And
mm,
so in the morning, we would say the seven principles of Kwanzaa, and then we would sing the Black National Anthem. So I grew up thinking of different heroes than the typical American kid. And then
mhm,
I went
mhm,
to public school in the third grade. So before that, I wasn't singing God Bless America and learning all about Abe Lincoln and
mm,
George Washington and those teeth. That's a whole nother subject. Those teeth. Um, but it's like the country is almost like divided, even
mhm.
now.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
it just persists. At Howard, the artists who were introduced to us as the giants looked like the list of your Spelman artists. Elizabeth Catlett, and Emma Amos, and Horace Pippin, and Charles White, and Jacob Lawrence, and Lois Jones, Alma Thomas. I thought those were the biggest artists I could imagine. I didn't pay. We did have regular art history, but it was sort of glossed over like it is at a primarily white institution. We didn't spend weeks talking about Andy Warhol or Pablo Picasso, or even it just wasn't that way. We learned about the European artists and painting tradition, but just in a chapter and moved on. The same way if you were at a primarily white institution, maybe in Black History Month, they might talk about Romare Bearden and the Jacob Lawrence and then move on.
Yeah. No,
so
how interesting.
I feel like I'm honoring the heroes that I grew up with and learned about, and I'm excited about them. It's always surprising to me when other people haven't heard of them. I did a portrait quilt of Frederick Douglass, and you'd be surprised how many people wrote on Instagram saying they had never heard his story before.
Wild.
Yeah. So, and that goes with, the monuments. That's always a big debate right now. Who is it that we honor? Who is it that we feel is important? But this country, that's a difficult question, because who is the we who we're talking about? If we're not unified, even saying that we are a we, who's American, or better yet, who's a human, and who deserves to live and who doesn't, then we're going to have a hard time trying to determine who deserves honor.
I think that's a good segue to the last question, and we'll keep the conversation going. But the last question we asked every artist is about kind of the history of portraiture. And traditionally, portraits have been commissioned by wealthy patrons to have their image last for posterity. So what do you think is the role of portraiture today?
I think for myself, I'm always trying to show what the truth of the matter is. Who is this person? And why are they important? But I don't necessarily think fame or money means that the person is important. I grew up around just hardworking people, working class people, people who strived and weren't necessarily going to be recognized. And maybe they never would be. But I think it's important to recognize the people in our lives who struggle and thrive and survive and live. I think it's important that an artist reflect the world around them and reflect. I mean, art is about your own inner journey. What is it that you're thinking about? Who are you around? So I think that portraiture, it should reflect who we are really. And I think as Black people, a lot of times the images that we see in TV and movies are like a false mirror.
Oh, yeah.
Some sort of funhouse caricature of what a Black person is. A lot of times people write to me and they say, as a white woman from the Midwest, I just want to tell you how much I enjoy your artwork. But they don't really need to say that, because it's not that I'm mad or anything about it. It's just that I feel that my art is for everyone. Anybody can like it. It's not that you should be surprised because you're white that you like something that is Black. Because me as a Black woman, I can like art from all different cultures, but I don't have to qualify the statement that as a Black woman, I like this Frida Kahlo. I just like this Frida Kahlo.
Yeah.
And I think that misconception about Blackness, it harms Black people and white people, because then white people think, this is not for me. Oh, these portraits of Black people, this is not for me. I need to make an excuse or a reason when, and I think that's unfortunate, that we've been forced into that, to think that we must have an excuse. I think that the portraits should reflect the true vision of humanity, and it can be for anyone.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's so interesting the way you speak about your education. I mean, from a very young age, as well as at Howard, at an HBCU, and how you bring that lens to your work. So there has to be something different about your work than what you said, these caricatures, these kind of funhouse versions of Black people that are often the imaginings of writers who have a white lens. And so having that rich background and history of centering, focusing on Black artists and histories is part of the secret sauce of what makes your art so amazing. I think it really is.
Thank you. Thank you. I think to be able to see things from different perspectives is a strength. They always have those examples in class. They'll have something happen and they'll ask everybody in the room, what did they see? And they all see different things. So it's important. Black art is important to create a correct picture of humanity, of America, because we're not getting the whole side of the story. The lens, that Black lens, seen from the inside out, is important. It's an important aspect of this story. And neither one of these are, I don't know what truth is, but you have your perspective and I have mine, and then hopefully somewhere in the middle is the truth.
Yes. Thinking about Black artists and rendering Black figures, we're asking every artist how you see yourself, and particularly the Chadwick Boseman portrait, Forever, in the context of the exhibition Black American Portraits, which looks at 200 years of art. Does it change the way you see that piece? And also, do you see your work in conversation with other artists in the show?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked that, because when I walked into the galleries where Black American Portraits was held, and when all the artists were there for the opening, it was like the greatest homecoming on earth to me.
It was.
And I felt like the artists from the past were in this space. I'm a very spiritual person. So like you said, when the portrait of Paul Cuffey was there, which I'm not a historian, so please forgive me. But Cuffey to me sounds a whole lot like Kofi.
It is. That's exactly what it comes from.
Okay, that's what
That's what it comes from.
I felt like I was being given an entree into this line and this succession of Black artists struggling and succeeding to tell our story the right way. And having my piece in the gallery on one hand, on the left, next to Carrie James Marshall's photograph, and on the right with Deb Willis with a quilted artwork, which I knew she had made quilts, but I hadn't seen any in real life. It felt amazing, because Deb Willis and Carrie James Marshall are heroes to me. They're living legends. They're geniuses.
They are.
They've reached such incredible heights with their careers, yet they still take time to talk to artists who are coming up behind them, like me, and even Deb Willis with her work at the university at NYU with even young artists.
Yes.
To have those two heavyweights alongside made me feel like I was a freshman, and that the senior classmates were allowing me to stand next to them. And it felt amazing. And to have Chadwick Boseman's portrait in there meant everything, because I felt like it's like hand in hand. It's for him, and it's me, and it's him at the same time. his portrait deserves to be in this exalted Los Angeles County Museum of Art. His portrait deserves to be in this historic exhibit of 200 years of Black American portraits. And so it just felt incredibly, incredibly gratifying to see the piece there.
Mm. And someone asked in the audience if they heard correctly that this portrait of Chadwick Boseman is in the permanent collection of LACMA, and that is correct. They asked if it will be on view forever. It will not be on view forever, but it is in the collection and will travel potentially in the near future. But also thinking about museum collections, part of the reason you probably haven't seen this quilt in particular by Deborah Willis is because it was collected in the 90s, brought into the collection, and it had never been on view, not once.
What?
Yes.
Wow.
So
wow.
it was a beautiful thing to bring it out and uphold this artist who you spoke of so beautifully, who has made incredible work herself and made room for so many others with exhibitions and books and gatherings and courses. It was a really powerful thing to do.
And incredibly validating. Deb Willis being, she's a professor, but I think she's also the director of
Yes, the African American Center for Visual Culture. It's something along those lines.
At NYU.
Yes.
So she's this extremely successful academician with her PhD, and at the same time, she herself is making a quilt, and quilts were not traditionally thought of as high art, or they weren't thought of as art at all. It was a low craft for poor people, for women, for laborers. So for her to make a quilt, it means even more like just validating my thoughts that quilts are fine art. Yes. And it's not just me who has to be in this space alone, but I have the heavyweight, Dr. Deborah Willis right next to me. So that's really incredible.
And thinking about the reverence with which you approach the fabrics that you choose, I believe that there are pieces of lace and fabric in this quilt that belong to her, the women in her family. So there's, it's called Living Room Picture Stories and has actual pictures on it, but there's also in the fabric this familial memory as well.
Incredible.
Yeah, and for context, this is a room within the galleries where we had primarily photo-based works, and we chose specifically to put the quilts in here because they're so tied to photography. We looked at the Met Gala photo of Chadwick in the beautiful cream, and translating that into this beautiful red and green is powerful.
Yes. And when you mention that cream, somebody else pointed that out. I always usually use black and white photographs because they allow me to exercise my creativity, my imagination. What colors do I want to replace these shades with? But Chadwick in that cream, someone just pointed out a few days ago, I didn't even register that I was drawn to him wearing a neutral tone without a pattern, so that I could still do the same thing that I do with black and white. So
I love that. And a couple people have asked about the vibrant colors that you use to render faces, to render skin. So can you talk about that?
Sure. And then if you could go to the photo I have of a child, it's really bright. I think it's the second to last photo in the slideshow, if not the last. Right there.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a work in progress. I'm working on it now and just trying to sort through what I want to say, how do I want to say it. But I use color in ways that would be more in line with the European painting tradition, using color to transmit emotion.
Mm,
Using in color theory, we talked about things. Red represents power, passion, intensity, and blues and cool shades might represent cool as in the color, but as in the mood,
mm,
cool, somber, quieter, more gentle. And so I like to play around with color to say two things. Sometimes the person might be all reds and oranges, or I'm trying to say this person might be more fiery, more energetic. Maybe I might be saying the blue side is more somber. I call this piece If I Ruled the World because I saw this cool little girl. It's a girl child. Her mother um, takes these amazing photos of she and her sisters. The little girl's name is Ella. And I saw both that she was super cool in the photo, her pose, but then also that she seemed very powerful. So
mm,
that phrase, if I ruled the world, she seemed like a little girl and seems like somebody who is going to grow up to be very powerful.
mm,
So I use color to transmit the mood, and she can be both. I also like exploring the duality. We're not just one thing at
mm.
one time. People can be very different around different people at different times. And then the
Yes.
prints that I'm using in here, the flowers on the vest, that's a fabric known as obapa in West Africa, which means a good woman in Ghana. So
Mm,
I'm thinking about her future, and I'm also thinking about her mother because her mother is the one who makes these beautiful clothes for her and her sisters and really elevates her children into supermodel status all through photos on Instagram.
mm. Oh, I love it.
Thank you.
And you have some other images of young, very young people, but most of your subjects are grown folks, right?
Yes. For the most part, I'm always trying to make time to do everything. I have so many
Mm-hmm.
photos that I want to do. I mean, I
Mm,
like making portraits of children and adults and
mm,
older people, younger people. It's just me trying to squeeze in everything.
mm-hmm. Speaking of making time to do everything, we are at time.
Okay.
We want to make sure you have time to continue
Yes.
making your incredible work and putting out such powerful images into the world. Thank you so much, Bisa.
Thank you, Liz. I've had a great time. And thank you to everybody for tuning in.
Yes, yes. Thank you, everyone, for supporting this program. Try to get over to LACMA to see Black American portraits or look out to see if it comes somewhere near you in the future. All right. Have a great day.